A single language policy for India has been a controversial issue for ages. Not all states agree. But then, India is known for its diverse culture and the plethora of languages its people speak. So, is there really a need for a universal language policy? Let's hear it from the Union Education Secretary Amit Khare. Khare, an Indian Administrative Services officer from the 1985 batch of Jharkhand cadre, became the Higher Education Secretary in 2019. Khare also holds additional charge of Secretary, Department of School Education and Literacy, Editorial Director of the New Indian Express, Prabhu Chawla, and the Vice Chancellor of Shastra deemed to be University, Dr. S. Vedasubramaniam, will also be joining the conversation.
Mr. Khare, the topic of our discussion today is one country, one language. Does a united India need a language policy? But I'd like you to start off by telling us in your opening statements exactly where are we with the new education policy, which has almost universally been lauded, been acknowledged as a very good one. But of course, everyone has said that the proof lies in the pudding in the implementation, including you. So, can we hear how far the government has come on the path to implementation, sir?
So thank you very much. And let me start by thanking you and the entire team of the New Indian Express and also the Vice Chancellor of Shastra University for joining us. And I would start by saying that it is not one nation, one language. In fact, in a diverse country like ours, we are a multilingual society. What the national education policy emphasizes is teaching in the regional languages, teaching in mother tongue and in regional languages. So it is not one language or one size fit all. In fact, the beauty of this policy is the flexibility in implementation. The flexibility it offers, not only in terms of language, but in terms of courses. For example, there can be 3-year degree program, there will be 4-year degree program. So depending on what choices a student makes, if somebody wishes to go for research, it is a 4-year degree program. If it is just graduation and then going out in the job market, 3 years would be sufficient. Similarly, multiple entry and exit.
Right.
That is also a flexibility. I mean, there are various components of this policy which will come into effect at different points of time, but we have identified about 10 items which the students will see in the next academic session itself.
Right.
The first is the Academic Bank of Credit, the ABC, because it is actually ABC of the entire higher education system. If we wish to have multiple entry exit, if we wish to have multidisciplinarity, then the Academic Bank of Credit is a must. Otherwise, it will be difficult to manage the records of the students. So the work on the Academic Bank of Credit is on, and by before the start of the next academic session, the Academic Bank of Credit will be there. The second, about multiple entry and exit, that option we have discussed with UGC, and what we have in our mind is that those institutions who join the Academic Bank of Credit and who have accreditation of at least A grade, they will be allowed to have multiple entry and exit within the institution. Across the institution, there will have to be, it will take a little more time because different institutions have different type of courses. So even in the technical side, say, migrating from one IIT to another, as of now, it will be difficult. But within the same IIT or the same university who has an Academic Bank of Credit, somebody can exit after a year and then come back within a specified period and again start the course. So this multiple entry and exit in select institutions. I mean, as you are well aware, there are 1,043 universities, and all of them are in different sizes, different. Many of them are affiliating universities having hundreds of colleges, and the number of students in some of the universities more than 4 lakhs or even higher. Some are research universities. Therefore, we cannot have one size fit all. So the start will be from those universities who join the Academic Bank of Credit and have an accreditation. The third will be about the teaching in the mother tongue. Now, some people, they are making as if it is teaching in Hindi or in Tamil or Telugu. The idea is not teaching in mother tongue by itself, but facilitating talented students who are from non-English background, non-English, could be any language, so that their talent is not wasted. And that what we have proposed. There is a task force under me. We'll shortly produce that report. A lot of discussions have taken place. And that will be the online courses of the first year will be available in the regional languages. So while the class may be conducted in English, in addition, the online courses will be available in different Indian languages so that a student can easily understand, even if he or she is from a non-English background, they are not made to suffer because of this, or they should not face a handicap because they are from a non-English background. So that is the third thing. The fourth is about the joint degrees with the different foreign universities. That regulations are also under process by the University Grants Commission. What the commission is likely, I mean, I can only say because I am only a member there. There are other members and the chairman. But the discussion that we have had is that the joint degree type of programs, or say a semester in Indian university, a semester in foreign university, and vice versa. So it will not be one-sided that we start sending our students abroad or we only start inviting foreign universities here, but will have to be both ways. The National Research Foundation will also come into place before the next academic session. That proposal has been cleared by the Empowered Committee. The Empowered Finance Committee of Secretaries has cleared it. Hopefully, I mean, we are quite hopeful because everybody has supported that by the next academic session, the National Research Foundation will be in place so that faculty can take advantage of the NRL. Online teaching has emerged as a very important tool, and therefore the formation of the National Technological Education Technology Forum, and also you may have read that the percentage of online courses, SWAYAM courses in any conventional program has already been increased from 20% to 40%. So this part is also complete. So some of these changes will be visible. These changes will be visible from the very start of the academic session. The common entrance exam for the central universities. That by and large, all central universities, including Delhi University, have supported this idea. It will be an entrance exam along with weightage to the school examination board, because we don't want the school examination boards, their value to be reduced. So it will be a mix of the scoring in the common entrance test and also the scores that students obtain in the respective school examination board. So this will also be, I mean, for central universities, they will all join, but if any deemed university or a state private university or a state university, any other institution, if they wish to use the score, they will be welcome. So all these changes you will see in the next academic year.
Right, sir. That makes it about 7. You said there are about 10.
Yes, there are smaller things also, particularly the credit bank will also have the different credit courses. So these new courses that UGC is bringing out, what will be the new modular courses? Because if it is multiple entry and exit,
Right.
the courses will have to be redesigned. They will have to be modular. It is not that anybody who leaves after first year, I mean, if she or he have the modular course, then the year will be wasted. So it will be modular courses. It is not similarly for the 4 year degree program. It is not adding 1 year to the existing 3, but it will have to have a new type of a course altogether. That is also being worked out by UGC. The encouragement to distance education, that at least one university in every state should be in a position to offer distance education.
Right.
It could be a conventional university. Many of these states don't have open universities. So the conventional universities, if they wish to offer this type of, online courses or a course in a distance mode, they will also be allowed. The institution of excellence, right now we have identified 20 of them, 10 in private, 10 in the government sector. And there is a possibility, we are requesting the government to increase their number to 50, that is 25 on the public side, 25 on the private side, 25 on both sides, 25 each on both sides. So IOEs will be allowed to have their own courses. The multidisciplinarity that we have talked about, that will be started from the IOEs. So IOEs will be offering courses which will have a variety of choices instead of having just science, humanities, commerce. I mean, the traditional distinction that we make, professional, science, arts, commerce, and technical courses. Instead of that, they will have multidisciplinary courses. But again, this will start with the IOEs.
It's all really exciting, and some of it is truly radical, especially the common entrance exam. I'm heartened to note that Delhi University has agreed to be part of it, because the kind of percentage cutoffs we see are almost unrealistic, although they are achieved by students. It is quite remarkable. Do you see a radical change happening, in Delhi University, for instance? Let's talk about Delhi University itself. You see a radical change happening then?
It will be a change, I mean, radical or otherwise, we will see how things develop. But that change is required.
Yeah.
There is a need to have a change. And what we really need to do, and that is why we are taking a little more time, is to have this transition in a smooth manner.
Right.
In a planned manner. So whether it is a 4 year course or whether it is the common entrance exam, the idea is to build consensus. Some of the things have already occurred. What is there in the policy? You may have read that joint entrance exams results, IIT, JEE results were announced yesterday about the March exam.
Right.
So now that exam, the one-time exam, which became twice a year, is now 4 times a year. The entrance exams are also, the number of attempts that one can take is more. I mean, let the student have a choice in case they have any difficulty in, for whatever reason, personal reason or family reason. If they are not able to appear in one exam, they are not able to take a test, say in March, they can take it some other time. These type of, actions which really help the students, that will be there. The Higher Education Commission will take time because a great deal of consultation will be required with the states, with the private universities, with the state universities, because that commission is not only for the central institutions, it is for all the institutions of the entire country. So that we will come later after due consultation with the stakeholders.
You said less pressure on students, less pressure on parents as well, less chance of nervous breakdowns happening in families, I think.
Yes, I mean, pressure on the parents is also there. And more than the pressure on the parents and the students, there is also a question of the logistics.
Yeah.
Thousands of students moving from one place to another just to appear in a particular exam. Now, with the help of technology, online exams are possible.
Right.
So, IIT, in fact, the JEE is totally online. NEET, of course, has not become online, but that we will have consultations this year with all the states. Some of the states are in favor of online, some are not in favor. So we'll try to build a consensus before we move to any new system for NEET.
Right. Wonderful. Professor Vaidya, may I request you now to, ask Mr. Khare some of the questions that are top of your mind?
Yeah, so it was actually a perfect opening to hear about a series of progressive reforms that's going to start in the immediate academic session that we are going to see now. And as the secretary rightly pointed out, sir, you had said that the HECI will take time because it is very comprehensive considering the type of education institutions that we are handling. What strikes me is the last point that you mentioned on the institutions of eminence. We are extremely happy to hear that the list might get expanded from 20 to 50, 25 of them private and 23 of them public. One question that I have in my mind, in fact, I wrote a long article on this when the first round was happening. In the private eligibility criteria, the need for 3,000 crores net worth of promoters was one eligibility criteria. Now, the new education policy seems to be having broad contours on performance and progress. Will the eligibility criteria also be based on performance
Yes.
of institutions and not net worth of promoters? That way, there are institutions who are good performers, but net worth of promoters is not 3,000 crores, but we can see them perform. So can we expect a change in the eligibility criteria also?
There is some change. Some change is being considered for the eligibility criteria also, because under the existing criteria, not many institutions would qualify. And as you rightly mentioned, the policy is outcome based and not input based.
Yeah.
So the earlier criteria of net worth, buildings, etc., that they are all input based. The output based will be what is their accreditation, what is their ranking, because ultimately the excellence is measured in terms of the rankings or in terms of the accreditation, not in terms of the type of buildings or the infrastructure. I mean, that is required, it is a prerequisite, but that does not make it a good university, I mean, having infrastructure.
Yeah. So the other thing that I had in mind was on teacher education and vocational education. This, in my opinion, I feel the impact that it can create to a larger cross-section of the society. Teacher education reaching to schools and vocational education considering the fact that we need a lot of skilled workforce. What is the thought process, the policy thought process in terms of the autonomy for universities to offer teacher education and vocational education without having to get approval from NCTE or AICT? Universities, they should be given autonomy to offer teacher education and vocational education to begin with. Is that something that's going to happen in the policy pipeline?
That is a part of the discussion of the Higher Education Commission. In fact, the important change which will be there in the Higher Education Commission, apart from the AICT and UGC coming together, will be the teacher education, which is part of the school education. It is considered to be part of the school education as of now, whereas they are all colleges which are higher educational institutions. So they will be brought under the Higher Education Commission. So whether it is technical education or teachers education, professional education, they will all be under the HECI. That is the proposal.
Yes, sir. And one thing that is actually very, very progressive is the type of universities that are going to exist as we move forward. Research universities, teaching universities with the potential for research, and then degree granting institutions. See, many of those who have been closely observing the new education policy, especially in 1968, 1986, followed by 1992 program of action, and now the 2020 policy. The shelf life of these policies are actually 2 decades or 3 decades, but everybody wants things to happen overnight. But there are certain reform process that has to be done in a phased manner. Now, the type of universities, it's not an easy task to convert institutions to universities overnight. Now, what again do you think is the time frame that is required to convert the entire higher education ecosystem into these 3 types of broad categories? And do you think that it's realistic considering the total number of institutions that we have? Is it a challenge, or do you think it's easily achievable over a period of time?
See, the policy itself provides for a 15-year window for these autonomous colleges to be upgraded. And under the Rashtriya Uchtar Shiksha Abhiyan, in fact, the funding is also being increased from this year, to incentivize the state governments to convert some of these institutions into universities or in a cluster university, that 4 or 5 colleges can come together and form a cluster university. So that is the move in a direction to have more autonomy of the institutions. So that is that process will be long. What we are, as I said in the beginning, that those items which affect the students directly, that we are taking up first. And there are certain reforms which are essential to the system. But say the formation of the Higher Education Commission is a very necessary reform. But it does not directly have any bearing on the students. So the student-centric reforms are the ones which are being taken up immediately. That is, before the start of the next academic session, we would like the students to know what is there in store for them. And the other reforms that can come gradually over a period.
Yeah. Since you said student-centric, the definition of who the student itself is getting changing over a period of time, considering that, online education is going to occupy a significant space. Now, people who are even 40, 50, 60 see it as an opportunity to engage with the continuous learning process. And the new regulations for online and distance education has definitely encouraged a lot of universities. But is it enough adequate to convert India into an exporter of education? Because we see online education as a significant policy instrument that can convert India to an exporter of educational services than an importer, as we are seeing today. To that extent, do you think online education still needs more autonomy and freedom to convert this import to export?
See, online education is more required to address the domestic students, whatever be their age. Because if the numbers, the GER is to increase from, say, the present 27.4% to 50%,
Right.
what it translates is an additional enrollment of something like 4 crores, because the youth population is also increasing.
Yeah.
Therefore, online education will be more addressing more of the domestic students.
Yeah.
But last week we had a meeting with the private providers. In fact, the focus of Study India program, that export of education, the focus of Study India program was more on the central government institutions. But this time we have decided that private institutions having good facilities, what happens many a times that while the educational standards may be high in some of our institutions, those students who are coming from abroad, the international students, they expect a certain lifestyle or certain living standards which are not available in many of our institutions which have high-class academic standards, but perhaps their infrastructure for international students is lacking. Therefore, why not open this sector? And secondly, all international students, they have different backgrounds and they may all of them may not like to be in IIT or institutions of that type. Therefore, why not open the sector, whether it is private? In fact, what we have decided is that we will not have any distinction between private and public institutions as far as internationalization is concerned. Because what is required is that an international student should have a good experience of studying in India.
Yeah.
And India means everybody. The private Indian institutions, the state institutions, the central government institutions, but they are visitors, they are international students. Let us give them a good experience.
So to create that international ecosystem, the infrastructure ecosystem, the access to finance is very critical. Now, my question is on that because educational loans to students are categorized as priority sector lending, but access to debt to create that infrastructure is not under priority sector, but that's the finance ministry's decision. But is it possible that select institutions, public and private, considering that you are not going to differentiate between them, let's say select top 100 institutions, and we can access, foreign dollar denominated loans which are available at cheaper rates, and the government can give a sovereign guarantee, and based on the performance of the institutions, if we can have access to such funds, we will not accelerate the process of infrastructure creation, which otherwise is limited because of very limited access to capital in the Indian markets.
In fact, the reorganization of Higher Education Funding Agency and external commercial borrowing,
Yes.
both have been indicated in this year's budget speech of the Honorable Finance Minister. And we are in discussion with the Finance Ministry once, because now the budget discussions are over.
Yeah.
So they would be having some time now. In April, we are having discussion with them, because the financing of this sector cannot depend solely on the governments, that is central government or the state government, because they also have their own resource constraints. We have to raise funds from the market. In fact, the entire idea behind the Higher Education Funding Agency was to raise funds from the market and not circulate only the equity which the central government has given to the funding agency. So this is something which requires restructuring of the Higher Education Funding Agency. Some of the issues which are still not sorted out is about the sovereign guarantee.
Yeah.
Because normally for such agencies, sovereign guarantees are not provided. So these are the issues which are under discussion with the Finance Ministry. But restructuring of HIFA and external commercial borrowing both are on the agenda.
But will that also include private institutions getting access to this? Because now it is limited to public institutions.
The restructuring will also mean whether we can include some of these private universities or the state universities with a state guarantee, because after all, the state governments also borrow from the Reserve Bank. So they can provide a guarantee, and if there is a default, it can be taken care through the Reserve Bank. So these are the items which are being discussed. But the funding agency, HIFA, will become more prominent as a funding agency and not the present system where they are just routing the central government funds to the central government institution. That is what is happening as of now.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Chawla, any questions to the Secretary?
No, I'm asking personal view. What does he think? Because people in North India don't speak many of the South Indian languages. Whether how to connect the people. Mr. Khare, you have some point of view on this?
As I mentioned to Madam Kaveri Bamzai in the beginning, it is not one nation, one language, but it is one nation, multiple languages. But why not use our languages? Now, one item which has been started this year, and it is a part of the education policy, it is mentioned there, to have Ek Bharat, Shresh Bharat. In fact, the program name, very few program names are mentioned in the policy. This is one of them. The policy itself gives the name Ek Bharat, Shresh Bharat. That why not people from North learn languages of, say, South India or East India learning about West India. So it is not only Hindi, English, or say some language of Eastern India or Western India. Multilingualism in its widest form. And the second is the mother tongue teaching. So learning in the mother tongue or in the regional language. And second is the Ek Bharat Shesh Bharat program. Now what the Ek Bharat Shesh Bharat program has done, which was not possible a few years ago, what it has done is that 100 sentences in each of the 22 scheduled languages are available for the reader. And now with the help of technology, one can listen to these languages, to these sentences in whichever language one wants, read it on the computer, also listen to the audio. So even the pronunciation can be corrected because one is listening through the audio. What we are trying is to develop a test where the computer audio will have a self-quiz and one can even check whether what they have learnt is correct or not. So the Ek Bharat Shesh Bharat program, and it is not only limited to languages, even learning each other's culture, learning about the literature which is available in different languages, learning about for example, in this 75th year of India's independence, Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, which is being celebrated, why not know about the historical places and the freedom fighters who may be in the tribal areas of Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or who may be in Manipur. The knowledge and the depth of the culture in every state is very high. And there is a need to understand all this. Unfortunately, what Mr. Chawla said, many a times we take more pride in learning, say, foreign language rather than learning an additional Indian language. The policy has clearly emphasized, and it is one of the part of the policy to have programs like Ek Bharat Shesh Bharat. One is to have initial teaching in the mother tongue or in the regional language. And secondly, to learn each other's language so that we understand, people of the country understand each other much better.
तुमसे खरे बात question I was trying to face because it is not a question that you go to South India, you find many more South Indians speaking North Indian languages.
That is one view. But what the policy has mentioned and what we are emphasizing is that let us try to learn more languages, more Indian languages, and to help them and to learn more languages. Just saying that you learn a language is not enough.
Right.
They have to be assisted. And now with the help of technology, this assistance is possible.
Why can't they make it compulsory for people from North India to be in the primary education have one of the South Indian languages as a compulsory language?
No, the primary school teaching, what we have emphasized is on the mother tongue. So it is not a question of why, because mother tongue, the learning is more in the mother tongue at the early stages. So to have conceptual clarity, for example, a student in a tribal area, they have to first understand even Hindi and then try to understand what is being taught in the class. So if the teaching is in the same language, that is what is spoken at their home, they will be able to understand the concepts much better and the learning levels, which are not very high. In fact, the various survey reports, including the survey reports within India, they have been indicating that class 5 and class 3 students in India, their learning levels are low. So that competence building can start easily by teaching in the mother tongue. The additional language that can come through the Ek Bharat Shesh Bharat, that is more of a voluntary program which will help in knowing a little bit of each other's language rather than introducing it as a medium of instruction at the primary level.
I think optional language should be there. The question is, why can't they hear one of the South Indian languages? and there should be provision for them for the funding agency to provide for extra funding for learning additional Indian language, as you rightly pointed out.
No, additional Indian language is a different thing. The mother tongue teaching, that is at the early stages, say in the schools, teaching in mother tongue, that is to bring more conceptual clarity. It is to improve the competence levels. It is not so much to related to the language policy, but more related to the development of the student themselves, whether they can understand more in their own language.
I'm just giving, it's not a parallel example, correct example, but I'm giving example. Like, for example, you go to Europe, where you find that every European country citizen knows one language of another country, neighbor country, or somebody. French knows Italian knows French knows somebody, German. This is countries like ours should also know. Hindi-speaking person should know Tamil person should know Hindi or but the other language. Why can't develop that culture and encourage it right from the beginning?
No, you are absolutely correct. But that culture will come through the Ek Bharat, Shresh Bharat that we have mentioned in the policy. It will not come by making it mandatory at the school level that you try to learn another language. It has more to do with the exchanges that will be built. And language is one of the items of that, let us say, the Ek Bharat, Shresh Bharat program. Other being the culture, their diversity, their history, all that is required. But making it mandatory at the primary level, I think what is more important is that they learn how to learn, and that is possible in their own mother tongue or the regional language.
Just one thing, the last question, Coursera, they had a very successful IPO 2 weeks back. And one of the prime movers of the IPO was a huge market for online education in India. And you had rightly pointed out that our efforts is also to first leverage the domestic demand. Now, considering that, the COVIDian opportunity that has thrown up to the world of online education, how much do you think our higher education ecosystem has prepared itself in the last 1 year? And what do you think we need to do further? And what is going to be the ministry's helping hand or advisory support to encash on this growing demand for online education so that Indian higher education institutions don't miss the bus?
You see, as far as content is concerned, the Indian higher education system and the institutions have done very well. In fact, the content which is there in English as also in many of the Indian languages, that compares with the best in the world. And that content has been used last year. In fact, all the IITs and other technical institutions, even though physically they are closed, but they had their first and the second semester on the online mode. So running an entire course of, let us say, highly technical institution like IITs in an online mode has been possible. Now, what is required on the other side is the devices. You see, the access to these content, that is the limitation. And right now, because we are talking of IITs, the problem is limited. But once we reach out to, say, 3.8 crore college students, then this problem will become a challenge. That until unless devices and the connectivity is there, the best content will also find, even with best content, we'll not be able to reach out. In the pandemic, what we tried out was to have a mix of the digital with the television. That is, the same courses which are there on digital, they were also broadcast through the educational channel. But slowly we'll have to ensure that individual students have their own devices. Some of the states have gone ahead. The Finance Commission, headed by Mr. N.K. Singh, who submitted the report, they have made a strong recommendation for incentivizing the state governments to provide devices to the students. Because ultimately, I mean, pandemic or no pandemic, the online education is here to stay.
I'll ask the last question here because suddenly it occurred to me this online education and technology is going to increase the gap between have-nots and haves. The question is, even now during the pandemic, most of the people who did not have any connection at home, they were not able to attend classes. And in the villages where there is no power, how you provide devices to them because they don't have the money to buy any smartphone or any other technique, any other device which they can use sitting at home. How you sort that problem?
See, as I said, that 15th Finance Commission has made this recommendation. The pandemic situation, what we had done, I have already mentioned that you have alternate courses through the medium of television, through the educational channels. But providing devices is not very difficult because we can have many of the state governments have already gone ahead and provided devices to the students. The electricity position is far better and connectivity through BharatNet is also there. So it will not be very difficult to reach out to every student. What is really required is that the content and the context, that is the devices, they should go together. And if they go together, the divide, in fact, which exists today, I mean, let me tell you the positive side of the online education. The divide which is there between, say, Delhi University, JNU, and the top IITs versus the regional engineering colleges or the state universities, that can be bridged by having the best lectures of these prestigious universities directly webcast to the remotest area of the country. So there is a positive side that now the best content is available to the remotest area. We cannot request a professor to travel all the way 2,000 kilometers, but the same lecture which he is delivering in Delhi or in Mumbai, that is webcast all the way to the remote places. And the systems which have now come on the online, that it is like a virtual classroom where people can ask questions, where they can interact directly with the faculty. So if you take the quality of education, I think online education is a great leveler. That whether I study in St. Stephen's at Delhi or I study in the Rajkiya Mahavidyalaya at some remote location, I can have access to the same lecture which is being provided, and I can also ask questions to the faculty. I can also interact with other students. So it is a great leveler in that way.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Khare, may I just quickly ask a last question? You know, this year has been quite terrible, especially for primary school students in, remote parts of India. They've lost an entire year. A lot of them have, in fact, especially younger students, have gone back to families. They've been employed as, they're working at home or they've been employed as laborers. What kind of efforts will the government do to sort of reclaim this lost year for these students, hoping that we are going to get back to physical education soon?
I mean, I don't deal with the primary education directly.
Right.
But let me assure you that the bridge course concept, which has been there in the primary education,
Right.
that students who drop out,
Yeah.
with the help of the local civil society, they are brought back to the system and offered a bridge course. Because supposing there is a 10-year-old,
Yeah.
now she or he cannot be asked to sit with the class grade 1 students because there will be age difference.
Yeah.
But they can be offered a bridge course and then assimilated in the mainstream. So this has been the practice in the past and it has worked well.
So when can we expect schools and colleges to reopen? I think that is the biggest question.
Many of them had opened. Many of them had opened, but because of this spurt in COVID cases, unfortunately, some of the states have again issued orders for closure of the schools.
Right.
Otherwise, we had started opening.
Right. But do we expect the next academic year to be physical or still it will be a hybrid form?
digital.
I mean, hybrid form is here to stay.
Yeah,
Pandemic or no pandemic, hybrid form is here to stay.
right.
I call it digital.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Khare,
Thank you.
for being in charge of our, education destiny. I hope in 15 years from now, we see a new kind of young Indian emerging who is more capable of taking on the new challenges of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have an engagement at 5, so I must leave.
Yeah. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed that session. If you want to catch the other sessions of the ThinkEdu Conclave 2021, you can log on to eventexpress.com, newindianexpress.com or even edxlive.com. If you are more of a social media person, you can also join us on our Facebook, Twitter and YouTube handle. Thank you for watching.